let's break your income out by insurance carrier. It's rather simplistic to do. You would be amazed how much insight comes from just breaking it out a little more granular. Breaking labor out by departments, having a clear EBITDA line. There's like very simple things you can do with your data where it can change the conversation or where we choose to focus our time and attention. Kick it.
Sean, I'm glad to be on here with you. Welcome to the Strata podcast.
Appreciate it.
Sean, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm the founder of Accounted4. So we started Accounted4 about 7 years ago, and it really all started because of a very simple question that when I was at the role prior, I was a director at an accounting firm, had a client that kept asking us, am I making money? And the interesting thing is we found as a lot of people in our company were answering what their profit was. And we kept getting the same question. Am I making money? Am I making money? And when finally I sat with him and I was asking him just to elaborate a little further, and the response was just eye-opening. It was, I'm being told I'm profitable, but I can't afford my tax payments. My credit card keeps getting larger. The bill's getting harder and harder to pay. Payroll's getting tighter. How am I profitable but having all these troubles all at the same time? And it just opened my eyes that I think a lot of business owners think in terms of cash flow, where we find a lot of the accounting industry really talks and thinks in more terms of profit. And there's a difference between the two, and we realized it just doesn't get talked about enough. So that started a journey of hundreds of interviews with CEOs, CFOs, CPAs, anybody with pretty much 3 letters after their name or in the title. We started just doing these interviews and started realizing that it's a problem just across industries. It's just is a lack of tools and resources in the accounting industry to look forward and to talk in terms of cash flow. So that's where Accounted4 started, and we've it's been a fun journey ever since.
One of the things I find fascinating, Sean, is, when you talk to anybody who has that professional tag to their name, they could be a PT, they could be a professional, baseball player, anybody. They went, they trained, they got a certification or a degree for that craft, right? And nobody said, hey, you also have to be an accountant. You also have to be a business person if you're going to go out, right? So how do you even start with people and say, hey, look, I get it, right? You want to work on your craft. You want to go home at night. You don't want to think about all the boring, mundane things like accounting or paying your rent, that kind of thing. How do you even get them rounded on the fact of you have to pay attention to this, right? You have to understand it alongside your craft.
Yeah, it starts with self-awareness. So, number one, we have to understand that for as many years of schooling as these therapists go through, they've never actually taken a business class in college.
That's right.
So there's a concept out there called the curse of knowledge that I can't remember which book. I think I can't remember which book I read it from or I read about it with. But the idea is that when you specialize, right? So think about a doctor, think about a PT or an OT. They know so much about their craft that they tend to forget that the base that all their knowledge is built off of, most people can't even comprehend. The same thing when it comes to accounting, when it comes to medical billing, right? When it comes to HR, retirement, there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that where end of the day, they're all different languages almost. So once you're self-aware, that's kind of step one. From there, it's taking out the jargon. It's not talking in accounting speak. It's not throwing the word EBITDA around 100 times during a call. It's figuring out what are some very simplistic, actionable, common sense approaches can we take to be able to better, impact our business.
Yeah, I like that. When you are meeting with folks for the first time, what do you find are the numbers or the financial pieces that they misunderstand the most often?
So when we first meet with somebody, the first thing we look at is what their data looks like. Can we actually trust the information? And 8 out of 10 times the answer is usually no. So, step one for us is always, it's hard to bring good insight to the table if you don't have good data. So during our implementation process, we always try to clean up the data first. But when talking with people, the one thing that we really try to get a gauge for is the company profitable? Is the company bringing in good cash flows? And is there anything really sticking out to us that is basically, are there any red flags? Because a lot of times you can spot a red flag, even if the data is not the greatest, you can generally spot a red flag pretty quickly. So depending on what that red flag is, what are the actionable items that need to be taken? What are those first steps once you take a look at the data?
Yeah, I agree with that. In terms of like PT owners, and we kind of hit on this at the beginning, they're clinicians first. That's their craft. To your point, they know a lot of knowledge very deeply. But in terms of how does that clinical mindset show up when you talk about cash flows or finances or things like that with your customers?
I find that most, especially PTs, I think PTs especially kind of gravitate towards the coaching approach that we take. Most of them have been athletes before they've played a sport. They understand somebody looking from the outside, giving their perspective. I find a lot of them are very open to making certain changes. I think that from my experience, therapists are very, very intelligent people. I mean, to go through that much college, that much schooling, you have to be a rather intelligent person. They also are aware that their gut feelings have gotten them this far. Turning around and telling them their gut feelings are wrong or not justified is not the approach. Most times their gut feelings are pretty on point. Usually our role in that scenario is how do we justify it, or how do we validate those gut feelings, or try to stop or try to use data to help them avoid making any catastrophic decisions that maybe their gut feelings on point to a degree, but there's some additional context that maybe we need to discuss, or some potential downside that maybe we didn't look at. So it's knowing that they can trust their gut, but it's trying to help them use some of the information at their fingertips to just validate it.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of gut feeling, we talked to a lot of folks who one of their key metrics will always be, hey, I'm looking at my PT clinic and my schedule is full, right? Like customers are coming in. If a customer or if a patient cancels, I've got a way to call, say, I've got a short list of 4 people to fill the schedule. So I go home feeling my gut's telling me that my calendar's full. I've got patients coming through the door, but there's still an unsteady feeling financially. So why do so many PT owners possibly feel that way?
Well, it could be a number of reasons, but a lot of times what we tend to find is, first of all, number one, you need a break even number. How many visits do I need to see to get me to my goals or to get me to profitability? All right. If you don't know that number, you might be pretty busy, but if you have a bunch of meetings or if there's a bunch of filler in that calendar, you can feel like you're getting a lot done. But if you're not hitting that minimum break even number, that's quite problematic. I always tell people one of the best leading indicators that we found. So whenever we look at metrics, there's lagging indicators, leading indicators. Lagging is most financial metrics. There's nothing you can do about it after you see the metric. You either hit the mark or you didn't. Leading indicators, you can actually impact ahead of time, right? They're like predictive indicators, if you will. So one of the biggest predictive indicator around scheduling that we tend to see is if I know that historically I have a 9% cancellation rate, and I know that I need, let's call it 100 patients. All you have to do is divide that 100 patients by that 0.91 of that arrival rate, and all of a sudden you'll get a number of how many visits you actually need scheduled to be able to hit that 100 visit marker. And a lot of times we do is we'll try to back into that number to say, you need a little bit over capacity because people are going to cancel. There's nothing you can do about it. Like you can fight it as much as you want or schedule accordingly.
Yeah. I mean, I know when I work with PT owners, and especially from the folks that own, 2, 3, 8, 10 practices, they pretty much have things dialed in. They have a flywheel. That flywheel runs. They can, to your point, they can see a lot of things. But when it comes to the smaller practices, where are the blind spots? Like I'm a small practice. Maybe I just started. Maybe I'm, mature in my business cycle. But like, where are the blind spots in the smaller practices that you see?
So once again, it does depend based off of a couple different criteria. Um, with that said, though, I'd say probably the biggest blind spot is not having a goal that they're shooting for. It's usually the thing that we start with, having a quantifiable, realistic, and timely goal goes a very long way, whether that's a revenue goal, a profit goal. I want to make X amount of dollars. I want to pay down my debt, or I just want to see X amount of patients. I think one of the biggest blind spots is if you don't have that begin with the end in mind mentality, you're going in a direction. It's just hard to tell whether it's the correct direction. And when you don't fix that, what we tend to find is especially people that are struggling with cash flow, what they start to do is they work more hours, they fill the schedule up with potentially patients that they're losing money every time they say, what happens is you work harder and they start to get that drowning feeling. What happens when you start drowning? You kick, but if you're not kicking the right direction, you could unfortunately be making the matter worse. So a lot of times once we are able to set goals for a client, you can always start backing into, are we making the right decisions that are putting us in the appropriate direction?
Yeah. Do you have an example of maybe a customer you worked with, or just a real world example of where they, to your point, they said, okay, great, I got to make a goal, Sean, right? I set my goal, I'm going to move forward. Do you have an example where maybe they set their goal, they did something different, made a better decision once they try to truly understood the numbers?
Yeah. So we have a client recently that I got a phone call from and was like, hey, I'm looking at my labor KPI. I'm being told over and over again, my labor KPI needs to be my labor has to be 55% of my income, right? Right now it's not. Who do I need to cut? What do we need to cut to be able to get us to the appropriate labor KPI? And so as we're looking, we're talking, we started realizing that interestingly enough, they didn't need to cut any people, but for the administrative team that they had, for the size of the location that they had, for the wait list that they had, they actually just needed to hire 3 more therapists for their location. And by hiring those 3 locations, even though there's an additional expense there, the extra revenue coming through the door, which they'd be able to fill those therapists up pretty quickly with the wait list, they'd actually get them to the labor KPI that they wanted. And so sometimes it's a little bit of a reframe of, I'm not hitting this number, so I need to cut. And sometimes it's actually quite the opposite. We see a ton of individuals that they are struggling to get new patients in the door and money's getting tight, so they cut marketing, which is the opposite of what you probably should be doing, right? So a lot of times it comes down to educating and just talking through the scenario and educating on this is where we are at today and this is why we are there. This is how we can get you to that final end goal.
Yeah. We're talking a lot about numbers, we're talking a lot about KPIs. How often though, when you're dealing with a customer, does their own culture come into play? When I think about you saying, hey, I'm going to go out and hire more people, do different things, I think about that in 2 different ways. There's some folks who say, like, I have a low attrition rate, I'll hire people who are employees of my practice. And you got the other folks say, like, I can't find anybody, so a lot of 1099s kind of coming and going, much more transient employee base. How does culture and that setup guides that very scenario you just talked about?
Culture is everything. You're not going to see culture on a P&L, but culture is everything. I think what we see a lot of is you have these doctors, you want them to be able to see a certain amount of patients, right? There's a certain level of accountability that you need to make sure you have a structure of accountability to make them to make sure that they're hitting certain goals so that you can pay them appropriately. If you don't have a good culture, if you don't have a culture of accountability, if you're not setting good expectations for what a good day looks like for your doctors or your therapists, little by little resentment starts up. Little by little they do start looking elsewhere. Turnover is a huge expense. There's a lot of research and studies on the expense of turnover of an employee. It's an insane dollar amount. Culture is something that if you're not constantly trying to improve your culture, which usually just comes down to setting good expectations, being transparent with your people, and making sure that you're communicating appropriately, and maybe being consistent as a leader, not coming up with new ideas every 3rd day. If you can implement those things in your company, it goes a very, very, very long way. It improves efficiency. It helps with, keeping good core employees. If culture's not in the back of your mind 24/7, you're missing the boat. And it doesn't mean just a ping pong table for the office, right? Like there's culture is the day to day. Or I think the best I heard was culture is the feeling in your employee's stomach on Sunday night.
Yeah, the Sunday scaries or not.
We've all had that one manager that gave us the Sunday scaries.
Yeah, yeah. I find that when I talk to different practice owners, it's really what they tolerate, right? That sets the culture because what you allow or what you tolerate, you allow, right? And so what you allow, that's what your employees see. And so I find it's something that the ones that the culture dial in, it's definitely around they tolerate certain things. They set a standard for for everything, and I think it's just super helpful for them to helps with their attrition, helps with it. Again, kind of having that flywheel of like we're all together, we're all moving. But let me ask you this: going back to your example, you think about they're hiring more PTs, they're going to expand at another location, things like that. How often do you find there's a lot of pre-work to do? To your point, like let's say culture's a mess, their attrition rate's a mess, maybe they got something else going on. How much time do you give them to kind of shore up that foundation before you say, hey, all right, we're ready for the new location. We're ready for more therapists.
A lot of times it comes down to what the company's constraint is. So there's an exercise I always like to, we refer to as capacity and constraints. If you can identify the different levers in your company, so basically the things that you can impact, what are the parts of your company that are in your realm of control, all right? As long as they're meeting a certain expectation, you can keep consistency around some of these different metrics and levers, such as your arrival rate. As long as you have a decent arrival rate, we can always sit there and try to make small improvements as we go. But until you have a certain core consistency, it's really hard to project out, some of the next decisions. Most clients have consistency. There's a concept called regression to the mean where you might have ebbs and flows, but generally there's a pretty good level average that we can identify. If that average is not where it needs to be, and there's a ton of opportunity costs that we're leaving on the table, a lot of times we'll try to tackle that first. So an example is we have a huge wait list. I need to go and hire people. I need to go hire more people, but I'm struggling to find good doctors, but I need to go and hire. Supply and demand. No, you don't need to go hire. You have a you have a controlled supply and there's a really big demand. Maybe look at your lowest carriers. Maybe you start working more specifically with maybe niche a little bit more. Let's make sure we're getting the biggest bang for our buck before we go and hire three, four more doctors, potentially paying them a dollar amount per visit that is more than what, a particular carrier is giving us. Let's make sure that we're growing intentionally. And let's make sure that all of that lines up with kind of what we started with, the goals that you have for the company.
You hit on something that I get excited about, but nine out of 100 do not, which is the word yield, which is what I've been preaching for a long time to my different clients, whether they're health systems or they're small practice owners. I say, well, what is the yield? How do you maximize your yield? And they kind of look at me like I'm crazy, right? But I would say, look, to your point, if this payer pays you $120 per contract, are you getting 120? Or are you getting 110, 100? Like, where are you getting? Do you guys dive into that with your customers? How do you guide them on even just payer contracts? Do you guys do that? Or do you even talk about yield with your customers?
We definitely analyze it. A lot of times we lean on the EMRs for their data, right? So, and when it comes to billing and CPT codes, we we, we lean on the specialists to be able to give guidance around that. That's clearly not where we come in, but we do try to analyze to figure out which are the carriers that are bringing the lowest, the lowest reimbursements. And a lot of times, the ones bringing the lowest reimbursements tend to be the biggest pain to work with as well. They tend to be the ones that pay a very delayed or, choose for a few months just not to pay. You can usually identify the ones that you probably shouldn't be working with pretty quickly. The hard part is when those carriers make up 15% of your business, 20% of your business, right? Then how do you approach it? We're very good at identifying where some of the problems, or we can talk about problems or opportunity is. We can see where a lot of that is. Usually we need to bring in some form of an industry expert of like, all right, now what's the steps we need to take to be able to either renegotiate or how do we drop them? What's the cost going to be cash flow wise if we decide to drop this carrier, go out of network? The actual implementation of it, we try to rope in, specialists that can assist with it outside of our company. But a lot of times when we can identify some of the underlying problems, it's for the client to identify why, whether we're not coding correctly, we're billing teams not doing what they should, or, is this just a carrier that no matter what we do, it's just not worth our time and attention.
Yeah. In terms of a PT owner, if they came to you and said, "All right, Sean, books are a mess," you can say, "Yep," you validate that, right? Like your earlier point. What can they do if they want to say, "Hey, look, I gotta be more certain about my financial stability in the next 30 or 60 days." Where do they start, and then what should they stop doing?
So the first thing we do with any company that we ever have a conversation with, so before we bring a client on, or before we bring a prospective company on as a client, we always do a complementary analysis because we need to make sure that number one, I'm not going to work with somebody that I can't bring value to. I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. But the first 4 to 6 weeks, we need to clean the data up. Like step one is get your data as clean as possible, put it into a format that not just to fill out a tax return. Of course, we need to fill a tax return out with the data, but let's get the data into a format that we can actually see trends, that we can actually start making some business decisions. Let's break your income out by insurance carrier. It's rather simplistic to do. You would be amazed how much insight comes from just breaking it out a little more granular. Breaking labor out by departments, having a clear EBITDA line. There's like very simple things you can do with your data where it can change the conversation or where we choose to focus our time and attention. So I'd say the first 30 days are, at least any company we ever work with, those first 30 days, we're cleaning up the data, we're restructuring the data so that we can actually use it to start making decisions.
Got it. In terms of how often do you have to call, the first 30 days you just kind of explained to me is you're kind of giving them guardrails. How often do you feel like you got to nudge them back in the guardrails after that 30 days is over? Like, is it like what, well, I guess what is the better question is, what is the discipline that they have to develop in that first 30 days of getting back to financial stability that Sean is going to call them every month and tell them, don't forget
Like
these
30
discipline
days.
things.
We always do a set like monthly call with like
Okay.
90% of our clients, where we want to make sure we're reviewing everything. I was related to like a GPS. The goal is to clean up your data so we know where you are today. The goal is to set goals so that we know the end destination of where we're trying to go. Then there's just the ETA. And if all of a sudden we're driving on the highway and we realize that one month we went off on the wrong road, our goal is to try to make sure that we nudge back to get back on the highway. And sometimes we do want to go the scenic route, right? Sometimes we see that there's traffic ahead. Sometimes it's like, yeah, but I really wanted that new location, right? I really wanted to go on vacation this month. I'm okay with taking a little bit of a hit. Perfectly acceptable. You, as the owner, can do whatever you want with your money. It's as long as they are aware of the impact and consequences their decisions make. And sometimes we have to adjust where are we going? Well, maybe it's gonna take us a little longer to get there. That's perfectly okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I'd say monthly, just to kind of make sure that we're aware of where we're at. And if we need to make little changes, we can continue to do so.
When you're starting out, and I think this is for any small business owner, it's a very personal thing. Like my family has a family business, it can be very, very personal, right? And when you're starting out, it's just you, and you add somebody, and you add more people, and next thing you know, you're growing, and become a real business, right? It's not just all about you; it's about a lot of people. You got a lot of team members. How often do you all find, and how do you guide your customers of marrying or over basically the fabric of personal life and professional life, and making sure there's not you have a healthy balance and an opportunity for your business to grow, and it's not hamstrung by something going on personally? Do you guide your customers on that financially?
Yes. Yes, and I should say. Right? Because think about it this way. End of the day, your business is truly meant to provide for you and your family. Right? You put your business in place, it should be able to provide to get you to a personal goal. Same thing. If you don't know what your personal goal, if you don't know how much you need to retire, And we have no idea how long you need your business for, or how much you should be paying yourself, or what you should sell your company for. So there
Right.
are certain things where we can tell them not to do something over and over again. We know that you're going to. There are certain behaviors when it comes to money that there's no point in fighting them. You have to lean into them. So instead, what we try to do is let's back into a real good owner comp strategy that's consistent, that's reasonable, that the business can afford. That way, you're not pulling money from the company, right? Let's make sure you're being compensated enough that we can almost budget you like you're a Comcast bill. And if it keeps bleeding in over and over, then yes, you try to put guardrails in. But overall, sometimes it's just putting a little bit of that structure in place. That way, the need to do so, you don't have to rob Peter to save Paul.
Yeah. When we think about the bigger practices, multi location versus the smaller ones, single practice. There's a big gap in there, right? Like we've all heard it in school of like, making your first dollar is one level of hard. Making a million is incredibly hard. Going beyond a million is even harder, right? But so what habits or like financial habits or otherwise do you guide your customers like every day? Like this is the hygiene you need to have to either have an amazing small business if you want to keep it small, where it just hums along, or hey, if your goal is to grow, what are those kind of, like I said, daily hygiene things you tell your customers, like if you just do these three things today, this week, this month, these are the ones you gotta wake up and have discipline to do.
As an owner, number one is learn to delegate. Learn to delegate. It's very difficult to, when you know you can do something very well, it's hard to delegate and watch somebody fail at it. Even though that's how you learned, by failing at this, it's hard to watch somebody else fail when you know that you can do it correctly. At the same time, though, there's a really good book called The E Myth that really talks through this. I'm sure the hard part is you have to learn how to delegate. You have to learn to build systems, right? When your team is failing, you need to look at the mirror and say, did I give them everything? Did I give them all the tools and resources they needed to be successful? Are they in an environment that they really exceed? So I'd say delegates number one.
I'll give you number two. I would say own your calendar, or somebody else will own it for you.
Ooh, that's a very good one.
Plan the work and work the plan, or somebody else will gladly give you their plan to work.
Yeah, I'd say know your focus.
Hmm.
There's and I forget the name of the book, but it's like the best CEOs are lazy or something along that line, where it's you as the owner, your job is to find the biggest kink in the hose and put all your time and energy getting that kink out. And then it's going to the next, and it's looking for the next one. And, you can make such a large impact, and it doesn't mean that you have to be practicing. Your impact to the company can be significant if you put your time and attention into the right areas. I think a lot of people, whether ego, whether they feel fulfillment out of seeing patients, or they see that the value they bring is around administrative tasks, we see a lot of people tend to hold on to those when really their time and attention and the ROI that they bring would be tenfold elsewhere. And I think, especially for larger clients, give yourself permission to take time to think. I don't think a lot of people tend to do that.
I agree with you. I'm glad you brought the E Myth. I actually was talking to a friend of mine the other day. I think that book was given to me and him actually about 20 years ago, probably. And that is the book I always come back to because it is a very simple read for anybody listening, just that takes you to the levels, right? Like how you level up. And it's very simple when you read it, but it's very hard to execute on. So I'm glad you brought that book up.
Simple isn't always easy. Or, like, one of my favorite lines is like, a lot of what's in some of these business books is common sense. It's rarely common practice.
Agree. Yeah, execution is hard to copy, is what I say.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Because most people wait for the perfect time, the perfect plan, the perfect day to start something or do something. And it's like there's never a good time for anything, right? So it's kind of like it's kind of like welcoming children into your home. It's like you're never ready, but you just got to
Yep.
do it. and you'll figure it out. So, well, Sean, it's been great talking to you today.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.